Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. 30 years on from the Fitzgerald inquiry, the Palaszczuk Labor government is setting a new low in Queensland politics. In the past month, Labor's greed and deceit has been laid bare for all of Queensland to see. Our state's reputation has been dragged through the dirt by a succession of integrity scandals. The integrity crisis is not on the fringes of the Palaszczuk Labor government. The integrity crisis is in the Premier's office. It's in the Treasurer's office. It's in the Cabinet room.
Order.
There is no doubt about it, Mr Deputy Speaker. Queenslanders cannot trust Labor. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Treasurer's far-left politics are divisive and they are destructive. Her economic policies are anti-resources and anti-business. But worst of all, the Treasurer is a hypocrite. In public, she rails against the top end of town,
Mr Deputy Speaker.
Private,
Order. One moment, please. Pause the clock. Point of order.
I gather that was unparliamentary language used by the leaders of the opposition there.
Order, members. Order. Member for Nananga, you have used unparliamentary language. I ask you to withdraw.
I withdraw. In public, she rails against the top end of town, but in private snaps up investment properties on her smartphone. Now, I certainly don't have a problem with people making a profit, but I do have a problem with politicians who break the integrity rules. And the Treasurer has broken rule after rule after rule. And she should never have bought a property next to Cross River Rail. She should never have declared, she should have declared that property immediately. She should have declared her interest in decisions on Cross River Rail and the new Dutton Park School. And she should never, ever have called the chair of the Crime and Corruption Commission on a Sunday to discuss the allegations against her. There are so many questions for the Palaszczuk Labor government, but we've been given no answers. Why on earth, Mr Deputy Speaker, why on earth did the Treasurer think it was proper to purchase a home that could double in value after Cross River Rail was completed? Why was this property not registered like the rest of her property portfolio? Why did she say her husband bought the property and not her? Why did she not declare her financial interest when she took part in key meetings about Cross River Rail and the new school? Why did she call the head of the CCC when she knew these issues were already being investigated and assessed by the CCC? Why was the recommendation from the bidders that a station be built at the PA hospital, not Boggo Road, ignored by the Palaszczuk Labor government? Because it was an election promise. As if, Mr Speaker, come on. Now, no one in South Brisbane would have complained unless they had an investment property right there in the Treasurer's Street. Let's be absolutely clear. No politician should make a personal profit from decisions that they make as a Minister of the Crown. We are here to work for the people, not for ourselves. And the Treasurer's conduct doesn't just look wrong, it is wrong. Her integrity is in tatters and she is destroying the public's trust. If the Treasurer cared about Queensland, she would have quit 5 weeks ago. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is clear that Labor's arrogant Treasurer will not resign. So it is down to the Premier to finally show some leadership. There was a time when the Premier was all about openness and transparent government. Well, Mr Speaker, haven't times changed? The Premier will not lift a finger against her deputy. The Deputy Premier is a protected species in Queensland. In fact, she actually gets more protection than the black-throated finch. The Premier, Mr Deputy Speaker, has dismissed every question about Labor's integrity crisis. She won't even allow questions from her own member for Bundamba. And she slapped down the former Premier, Peter Beattie, when he dared to question the Premier's weak leadership. Labor's longest-serving Premier in the post-war era was told to be quiet and get back to his day job. That is not leadership. That is arrogance. Mr Deputy Speaker, instead of attacking her critics, the Premier needs to face the truth. It is beyond doubt that the Deputy Premier has repeatedly broken the rules that are meant to maintain the integrity of our political system, the rules that protect Queensland against corruption. Yet the Premier continues to hide behind the Crime and Corruption Commission, even though the CCC has made it abundantly clear, crystal clear in fact, that it has no jurisdiction over the Ministerial Code of Conduct. So whether the Premier likes it or not, it is time and it is down to the Premier to act. She has no excuse not to sack the Deputy Premier. Does the Premier really believe that she should only sack a minister if they are charged with a criminal offence? Mr Deputy Speaker, it defies belief that the Premier's own Chief of Staff has been allowed to benefit from a state government technology fund. David Barbagallo, the most powerful man in the Palaszczuk Labor government. He is the Premier's closest and most trusted advisor. Yet his company can get a six-figure grant from his own government. That does not pass the pub test, and that does not pass the integrity test. But once again, the Premier knows nothing, sees nothing, and again does nothing. Her only response is to hire private consultants who benefit from major state government contracts to decide if the grant was legitimate. That is totally inappropriate. This case should have been referred to the Queensland Auditor-General for a full investigation, for a full independent investigation. Meanwhile, the Employment Minister has been enjoying a secret ski trip to Canada, courtesy of a senior advisor at another business consultancy with major government contracts. The Employment Minister doesn't seem to be worried about the 173,000 Queenslanders who are out of work. Oh no, she's too busy skiing in Whistler. Just like the Deputy Premier. And the Employment Minister had such a great time that she completely forgot to put her holiday on the register of members' interests. Mr Deputy Speaker, the past teaches us that the biggest cause of corruption is incumbency. Labor have ruled this state for a generation, and they have enjoyed—
Order! Order! Pause the clock. Pause the clock. Member for Pine Rivers, you are making interjections when that's not in your correct seat. You are now warned under standing orders. Member for Miller, I ask you to cease your interjections as well. Member for Chatsworth, I ask you to stop quarrelling across the chamber as well. Thank you, Member for Chatsworth. Member for Nananga, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Minister, the member for Miller, is probably reminiscing about being called foolish by the Crime and Corruption Commission. But very, very foolish. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, Labor have ruled this state for a generation and they have enjoyed the trappings of power. There is now a disturbing culture of entitlement at the top of the Labor Party. It is so ingrained that Labor leaders simply cannot see it. I promise them that the people of Queensland can see it, and they are sick of it, and they are certainly busy talking about it. We have heard revelation after revelation, but we have not seen a single resignation. the responsibility for this integrity crisis that is at the Premier's door, the responsibility for this lies at the Premier's feet. The Premier must stop being weak. The Premier must stop cowering in the corner. The Premier must clean up her grubby government. The Premier is not just facing an integrity crisis. The Premier is facing a credibility crisis. The people of Queensland are watching, and, Mr Deputy Speaker, they will judge the Palaszczuk Labor government because of this integrity crisis.
Thank you, Member for Nanango. Before